November 24th, 1971, a cold gray evening before Thanksgiving. Flight 305, a Northwest Orient Airlines Boeing 727, takes off from Portland, Oregon, heading to Seattle. The passengers are relaxed, sipping drinks, flipping through magazines, unaware that they are about to become part of one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in American history. Sitting quietly in seat 18C is a man dressed in a dark suit, neatly pressed, with a black tie and a white shirt. He looks ordinary, a businessman, maybe a banker, perhaps just another traveler heading home for the holidays. He orders a bourbon and soda, lights a cigarette, and slips a folded note into the hand of a flight attendant. At first she tucks the note into her pocket, assuming it's just another man's clumsy attempt at flirtation. But then the stranger leans toward her and whispers words that send chills racing down her spine. "Miss, you'd better read that note. I have a bomb." What follows is a story so unbelievable that it sounds like a Hollywood movie, but it happened and it has never been solved. The man, who identified himself only as Dan Cooper, demanded $200,000 in cash for parachutes and a fuel truck ready to refuel the plane in Seattle. His commands were calm, polite, even courteous, but deadly serious. The passengers never knew they were in danger. They thought the plane had a simple delay. But behind the scenes, an incredible drama unfolded. The money was gathered, the parachutes delivered, and somewhere over the forests of Washington, in the freezing night sky, the man known as D.B. Cooper opened the rear stairs of the 727 and jumped into history. No trace of him was ever found. Not his parachute, not his body, not the ransom money, nothing. Only silence, only mystery. In the decades since, the legend of D.B. Cooper has become a true American myth. Was he a criminal mastermind who got away with the perfect heist? Was he a desperate man who died in the jump, his body lost forever in the wilderness? Or was he something else entirely, a ghostly figure who slipped through time, leaving behind only questions? Tonight, we revisit the vanishing of D.B. Cooper. We'll retrace the events of that night, follow the investigation that spanned decades, explore the suspects who might have been Cooper, and uncover the bizarre clues that continue to surface, including bundles of his ransom money washing up years later on a riverbank. This is not just a story of crime, it's a story of mystery, obsession, and the enduring allure of the unknown. Because in the end, the name D.B. Cooper doesn't just belong to a man. It belongs to America's greatest unsolved hijacking, a riddle still dangling in midair. Half a century later, welcome to the vanishing of D.B. Cooper, America's greatest unsolved hijacking. It began like any other routine flight on November 24, 1971, just after 2:50 p.m. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 lifted off from Portland, Oregon, bound for Seattle. On board were 36 passengers, a crew of 6, and one man whose name would be etched into legend. He called himself Dan Cooper, though due to a reporter's mistake, history would remember him as D.B. Cooper. He carried no luggage except for a briefcase. He appeared calm, polite, and almost forgettable. Witnesses later described him as in his mid-40s, with neatly combed dark hair, a plain suit, and a pair of sunglasses that seemed to hide his intentions as much as his eyes. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed stewardess Florence Schaffner a folded note. She slipped it into her pocket without reading, assuming it was a phone number. But Cooper leaned closer, his voice steady. "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Her hand shook as she opened it. The note was simple and chilling. Cooper claimed he had explosives in his briefcase. To prove it, he cracked the case open just enough to show red sticks wired together with cords and a battery. It looked real, and that was enough. Cooper's demands were precise. $200,000 in negotiable American currency. for parachutes and a fuel truck waiting in Seattle. He instructed the crew to relay the demands to authorities, warning them not to play games. His tone, however, was strangely calm. He was never violent, never raised his voice, and even reassured the crew he didn't want to hurt anyone. As the minutes ticked by, the plane circled Seattle while law enforcement scrambled. Banks pulled together stacks of $20 bills, 10,000 of them, while FBI agents raced to gather parachutes. By 5:45 p.m., the ransom and gear were ready. Flight 305 touched down in Seattle, but Cooper allowed only one window to be used. He exchanged the passengers for the money and parachutes. Everyone walked away unharmed, never realizing they had just been part of a crime that would baffle investigators for generations. But Cooper wasn't finished. He instructed the pilots to prepare the 727 for another flight. This time, the journey would lead into darkness and into legend. Cooper's orders for the next flight were unusual, almost surgical in their detail. He demanded the plane fly toward Mexico City, but at an altitude of just 10,000 feet, far lower than usual. The landing gear was to remain deployed and the cabin unpressurized. The airspeed no more than 200 knots. The pilots protested. Flying so low, so slow, would eat up fuel too quickly. Cooper compromised. They would first head toward Reno, Nevada to refuel. The FBI had agents ready at airports along the flight path. Military planes tailed the 727 from a distance, their pilots watching for any sign of movement inside. But inside the cabin, Cooper was strangely composed. He sipped bourbon and smoked cigarettes, occasionally making small talk with the crew. One stewardess later recalled that he even paid his drink tab, leaving a few dollars behind like any ordinary passenger, yet the calmness made it more unsettling. Cooper seemed prepared, almost professional. He wore dark wraparound sunglasses, studied the parachutes carefully, and even instructed the crew to head to the cockpit and remain there. He wanted no witnesses for what was about to happen. At 8:00 p.m., somewhere over the dense forests of Washington state, the rear staircase of the 727 was lowered. The crew felt a sudden shift in air pressure. The plane rocked slightly, buffeted by the freezing November winds. And then, just after 8:13 p.m., a light flickered on the control panel. The stair pressure indicator D.B. Cooper was gone. He had leaped into the night, carrying $200,000 strapped to his body, vanishing into the stormy skies. No one saw him jump. No one saw where he landed. In the darkness, in the rain, with 200-mile winds slashing across his body, Cooper disappeared into history. The FBI's immediate response was chaos. Hundreds of agents, soldiers, and police officers scoured the forests of southern Washington, focusing on an area near Ariel, a small town surrounded by rugged terrain. They searched on foot, by helicopter, and even dragged rivers. But no body, no parachute, no money was ever found. The conditions that night were brutal. Freezing rain lashed the ground. Temperatures plummeted. The terrain was dense, mountainous, and unforgiving. Experts argued that even a trained paratrooper would have struggled to survive, and yet Cooper had prepared. He chose a 727 for a reason. It was one of the few aircraft with a rear staircase that could be lowered mid-flight. He had demanded 4 parachutes, ensuring authorities wouldn't sabotage them. He knew enough about flight operations to dictate altitude and speed. Whoever Cooper was, he wasn't an amateur. Still, doubts lingered. Some FBI agents believed he died that night, his body lost in the wilderness. Others pointed to the lack of evidence. No remains, no gear, no trace at all. Could Cooper have survived the impossible jump? Years later, in 1980, a boy camping along the Columbia River stumbled upon a shocking clue: bundles of decayed $20 bills totaling $5,800 buried in the sand. The serial numbers matched Cooper's ransom money, but how did the bills end up there? Was it a sign Cooper perished in the river? Or had he hidden them deliberately? A breadcrumb trail for investigators to chase. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Because after that, nothing else surfaced. D.B. Cooper had vanished, as if the night had swallowed him whole. The FBI launched one of the most extensive manhunts in American history. They called it NORIAC, short for Northwest Hijacking. Hundreds of agents combed through every possible lead. The parachutes were traced to local suppliers. The $20 bills were microfilmed to track circulation, and every suspect with parachuting experience or criminal ties was questioned. They interviewed pilots, skydivers, military veterans, even criminals who specialized in hijackings. Roadblocks were set up, rivers dragged, logging camps searched, yet nothing. Over the years, the FBI checked out more than 800 suspects. Some were ex-paratroopers, others ex-cons, a few simply suspicious men who bragged too loudly in bars. One of the earliest suspects was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., who staged a similar hijacking in 1972 and parachuted out with $500,000. But McCoy was caught, and the FBI later said he lacked Cooper's profile. The frustration grew. Agents had only Cooper's physical description, his tie left behind on the plane, and a few fingerprints. Witnesses remembered him as calm, polite, even gentlemanly, not a monster, not a maniac, but a professional who executed his plan with chilling precision. As years passed with no answers, Cooper became more than a fugitive. He became a ghost, the man who beat the system, who outwitted the FBI, and who simply disappeared. If Cooper survived the jump, who was he? Theories abound. Some believe he was a skilled paratrooper, possibly a military veteran from World War II or Vietnam. His knowledge of aircraft suggested training, perhaps even insider access. Others argue the opposite, that Cooper made mistakes no expert would. He jumped into freezing weather at night without proper gear in a storm. Could he really have survived? Over the decades, a few suspects stood out. Richard McCoy, the copycat hijacker, who used nearly the same method. He looked similar and had military experience, but his sloppiness compared to Cooper cast doubt. Dwayne Webber, a man who confessed to his wife on his deathbed, claiming he was Cooper. He had a criminal past and matched some details, but evidence was thin. Kenneth Christensen, a Northwest Orient flight attendant, familiar with the planes. His family claimed he hinted at having money and a secret life. Robert Rackstraw, a decorated pilot and ex-soldier who had the skills and the daring. Investigators long suspected him, but no definitive proof ever surfaced. The lack of closure kept theories alive. Was Cooper an ordinary man who vanished into the woods? A professional who escaped cleanly, blending back into society? Or did he die that very night, his remains lost forever? With every year that passed, D.B. Cooper's story grew larger than life. He became a folk hero, an outlaw in the tradition of Jesse James or Billy the Kid. Books, films, and documentaries romanticized him as the man who tricked the FBI and vanished with a fortune. But beneath the myth, the truth remained elusive. The $200,000 ransom was never spent. Not a single bill turned up in circulation. The tie Cooper left behind contained unknown particles, suggesting ties to aerospace or metal industries. The money found on the Columbia River only deepened the mystery. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the case, admitting that after decades of investigation, the trail had gone cold. Cooper's true identity remains unknown, yet his legend refuses to die. Every year, new theories surface. Treasure hunters still comb the forests. Amateurs still trace the serial numbers of missing bills. And somewhere in the imagination of America, Cooper is still out there, a shadow, walking away with his secret forever. The story of D.B. Cooper is more than a crime. It is a riddle, a puzzle that has haunted America for more than 50 years. On that cold November night in 1971, a man stepped onto a plane, calm and quiet, and changed history. He demanded money, parachutes, and a chance at freedom. And then, in a leap of faith or madness, he vanished into the storm. Was he a brilliant mastermind who pulled off the perfect crime? Was he a desperate man whose body still lies somewhere in the wilderness, swallowed by time? Or was he something else entirely? An ordinary man who became extraordinary by disappearing into legend. The FBI could not find him. Journalists could not expose him. Even time could not erase him. And maybe that's the real power of the Cooper mystery. Not in the crime itself, but in the questions it leaves behind. Every theory says more about us than about him. Some want to believe Cooper survived, escaping into a new life, thumbing his nose at authority. Others believe justice found him in the form of the storm, ending his story before it began. But no one truly knows, and perhaps that's why the legend endures. Because in a world obsessed with answers, D.B. Cooper reminds us that some mysteries refuse to be solved. Some men vanish, not just from the sky, but into history itself. So I'll leave you with this question. Who was D.B. Cooper? Was he a criminal, a hero, a ghost, or just a man who gambled with fate? Tell me your theory in the comments. Do you think he lived to spend the money, or did he die in the cold November woods, his secret buried forever? And if you want more stories like this, mysteries that refuse to die, legends that haunt America's past, and dark secrets that still demand answers, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell. Because the next mystery may be even stranger than this one. This has been The Vanishing of D.B. Cooper, America's greatest unsolved hijacking. Until next time, remember, sometimes the scariest stories aren't about monsters or ghosts. Sometimes the scariest story is the one that's true and unsolved.